Today from the global lane, more popular than the Ayatollah, Jesus revolution in Iran, thousands of mosques closing.
What's happening there is actually representative of what's happening in the Islamic world.
Trump attempted assassination fallout, the agency under fire. The Secret Service director resigns.
These are multiple failures that have stacked up, one on top of another. It is systemic failure across the board.
Global currency effort delayed. Rising opposition to a digital dollar.
The government shouldn't be trusted with a CBDC because they're so ripe for abuse. The government would have Americans' data by default.
And what is needed now in the aftermath of the assassination attempt against Donald Trump? An independent investigation, less DEI, and more training to fix a broken U.S. Secret Service. And it's all right here on the Global Lane. Risking it all for new faith in Christ. Worldwide, Muslims who leave their faith are considered apostates. And according to the Quran, they must be killed if they refuse to return to Islam. Regardless of the danger, our next guest contends Iranian officials report so many Muslims are now coming to Christ in Iran, they've been forced to shut down 50,000 of 75,000 mosques. Here with more is Don Schenk. He's executive director of the Tide Ministry. Don, this is incredible. If true, 50,000 mosques shut down, at least 1 million people have accepted Christ in Iran. So why? What's happening there that's different than other parts of the Islamic world?
Well, I think what's happening there is actually representative of what's happening in the Islamic world. And those statistics there that were quoted in a blog that we had posted are not something that we came up with on our own. Those have come from other research and reputable news agencies that have provided that. But as God has opened the door for our ministry to take media presentations into Muslim countries, we do radio programs and some TV programs. Currently, for example, in the Middle East, we have 3 Arabic dialects that we're broadcasting in. And we're seeing people who are hungry for something of purpose and substance. And I believe that God has opened that door, and he is working in the lives of these of certain areas and populations. We've had reports of dreams and visions. And as we have people responding, one of the things that I see is they are finding a value in who they are. They're also finding purpose and I think a different understanding of who God is. We get responses from listeners who say, now I understand that God loves me. I always thought that God wanted to punish me. And I think there's an awakening, as I said, that's taking place across the Muslim world, not just in Iran. I think Iran, there is an incredible turning of the tide there. And sorry for that. That's not an intentional play on words there, because we actually, other than our satellite broadcasting that goes in there, we don't have anything on the ground in Iran.
Well, how about Afghanistan? We don't hear much about Christians there, Christian growth there, I guess, since the Taliban took over. Of course, it's extremely dangerous to leave the Islamic faith there and become a Christian. Tell us more.
Right. And that's another area where it's extremely difficult to get boots on the ground in. And so that's why, we're beaming in and sending the gospel in on radio programs. And that's where, again, we are getting positive responses and trying our best to help connect these. They're with groups. It's very hard to connect listeners with others in the country because they have to basically meet as underground churches. And so that there's a lot of suspicion of, okay, if I'm going to meet with these people and share that I'm now a believer, are they really true believers? Or are they just trying to identify me? Because as you mentioned earlier, it's more than simply being ostracized or disowned by your family. It is actually the threat of death. So accepting new life in Christ means accepting the possibility of your life ending in this world.
Any other countries that are exciting you right now where we're seeing remarkable growth and good stories?
I would. There's one, I mentioned that we have 3 Arabic dialects that we're broadcasting in, and Yemen is a country that, if you go back in the history, within the first 5 centuries of Christianity, there were believers reported in Yemen. However, today, after Islam then was established, today Yemen is probably 99.9% Muslim.
Well,
Go ahead. Go ahead. But the Christian faith is growing there, and the Joshua Project reports that the growth rate of Christianity in Yemen is currently almost double the global average. Yet there's so few there that we're struggling. Our model is to use indigenous believers to share their faith through these media programs. So they're sharing their faith in their own language with their own people. We've had this goal to go into Yemen for a couple of years now. We've struggled yet to put together a team of indigenous Yemeni believers who can help us do that.
Well, it's very exciting what's happening in the Islamic world. Don Schenk, the Tide Ministry, roll tide. God bless you.
Thank you.
A Secret Service disaster. Before she resigned this week on Capitol Hill, the director of the United States Secret Service admitted the agency's response during the attempted assassination of former President Trump was a breakdown and a colossal failure. Trump's White House doctor said a bullet from the shooter's rifle came within 1/4 of an inch of killing the former president. Joining us with more to explain about the Secret Service failures and the testimony of former Director Kim Cheadle is Keith Hansen. He's Director of Law Enforcement Training at Critical Dynamics. Mr. Hansen is also Chief Operations Officer at Right America Media. What kind of replacement do we need for Cheadle? She was caught up in the whole DEI thing and didn't have a lot of experience with the Secret Service prior. I guess she worked for Pepsi prior to that.
Well, she was a Secret Service an agent. She was assigned to Joe Biden's detail. So she did have some Secret Service experience. Then she went to Pepsi and she was protecting the Cheetos. And then she went on to be director of the Secret Service. It should be somebody who's been in that organization for the majority of their career, who's had the opportunity to work in a variety of different capacities, maybe in an investigative sense, then maybe in an undercover sense, then maybe in a plainclothes executive protection sense. But somebody who knows that organization inside and out, that has a jacket that is filled with commendations and merit-based recognitions for the things that they've done within that organization. Leaders can't sit back and tell somebody. And in my perspective, a good leader is not somebody who says, you go do this and you go do that. A good leader is somebody who says, let me show you, let me guide you. I will lead the way. You will be a warrior forged in my image. That's what a leader in an organization like the Secret Service would be. And Kim Cheadle is not in a position to be able to do that. Thank God she had the presence of mind to resign, because completely, wholly, and totally inadequate in that role. And she's going to get somebody else killed if she were allowed to stay in that position for any length of time beyond right now.
How could a person seen with a gun on a roof 130 yards away from Trump be deemed a person of interest but not a threat to the former president?
I think you're asking the same question that a lot of people are asking, to be honest. Listen, these are multiple failures that have stacked up, one on top of another. And when you look at failures, and I'm using that in the plural, fail so miserably by accident. It's one of those that, when you look at it, this asks a lot of questions, and this is what tills that fertile ground where the conspiracy theories grow so rampantly. It is systemic failure across the board.
Well, and then when you're not forthcoming, Cheadle on Monday was evasive during that House hearing before she resigned Tuesday. She didn't answer the question posed by Congressman Jim Jordan, who wanted to know how many times the Secret Service denied Trump additional agent assets. So what difference, in your opinion, would another, say, 4 or 6 agents have made in this assassination attempt, especially when you have a crowd of more than 20,000 people in attendance?
Well, numbers don't mean anything. What matters is the quality of the training, the quality of the what we refer to as high fidelity simulation training. Listen, you can go through all of the range training that you want to, the drawing from your holster and getting a shot off on target, but in a contextual context, that's not relevant. qualifications, the qualifications that most police officers or federal agents are required to do in order to meet the minimum administrative standards to carry a firearm are not contextually relevant to situations that an officer or an agent would find themselves if they were involved in an officer-involved shooting in a real-world engagement. So it's the quality of the training, the amount of high-fidelity simulation training that these officers or agents would go through, and then their core competencies. And listen, the bottom line is that there are three ways that people are going to react to an extremely stressful situation or a high cognitive load. And it's the classic fight, flight, or freeze situation. Some people are absolutely going to freeze. That's the deer in the headlights look, as their brain is trying to process information that's coming at them very rapidly. Other people, they're going to follow their instinct to survive. They're simply going to turn and run away, take whatever evasive action that they can. But then the true professionals are the ones that are going to fall back on their training because they've been there before, not in the literal sense, but in the figurative sense. They've trained for this. They understand what to do because they've been in situations that are very similar. And in an organization like the Secret Service, where especially those level agents are training and preparing to do one thing and one thing only, and that is to protect a high-value asset. So from that perspective, the training that they receive, that high-fidelity simulation training, should most closely replicate the types of situations or the likely scenarios that those agents or officers are going to find themselves in. And clearly, that is not the level of training that those individuals have been adequately exposed to.
Okay, we'll see who's named to replace her, and we'll see what's revealed about that assassination attempt in the days ahead. Keith Hansen of Critical Dynamics, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Some financial experts fear the Federal Reserve might take action giving it greater control over Americans' financial freedom. That threat is the creation of a government-backed digital currency. CBN's Dale Hurd explains why this move is not only bad for consumers, it's bad for governments as well.
When asked whether a Federal Reserve or central bank digital currency might be on the horizon, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell said no.
People don't need to worry about a central bank digital currency. Nothing like that is remotely close to happening anytime soon.
While Powell admits the central bank continues to work toward this currency, he realizes the obstacles to success are insurmountable. For starters, the Fed knows a central bank digital currency, or CBDC, could wreck the nation's banking industry, threaten the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency, and even threaten the Fed itself. Financial expert Nick Anthony of the Cato Institute and author of the new book, Digital Currency or Digital Control, says CBDCs don't do much of anything well except spy on you and control your money.
The government shouldn't be trusted with a CBDC because they're so ripe for abuse. The government would have Americans' data by default. It would be on their servers a click away.
Digital money could be programmed solely for use towards certain purchases at certain times or with an expiration date. It could also be turned off, like how the Canadian government froze hundreds of bank accounts to stop the Canadian truckers' blockade over COVID restrictions.
Programmability has been something that many central banks and many governments have been looking into, where payments could be programmed or the money itself could be programmed.
However, Americans already have digital money, from credit and debit cards to apps like PayPal and other cryptocurrency. In addition to competing directly with those financial tools, a central bank digital currency would be able to divert funds that private banks need to survive.
If we think about the current banking system, where deposits come in and then banks use those deposits to fund loans, a CBDC poses a fundamental threat to that, where every dollar that's held as a CBDC instead of in a savings account, for example, would mean that that's a dollar less that the banking system can use.
A digital dollar would also be way more than the Federal Reserve, with its 20,000 employees, could handle. The Fed would have to take on the credit risks of hundreds of millions of Americans, as well as the legal responsibilities the private banking sector currently handles. And if you've ever stood in line at a DMV, you can imagine just how badly the government could mess it all up. The Eastern Caribbean Central Bank's experiment with what it called Dcash was a small disaster. A single computer glitch made the currency unusable for months. And do Americans want to entrust even more of their financial information to the government, given that the Fed has been hacked several times in the past and leaked sensitive information about financial firms just last year? While there is talk of a privacy-enhanced CBDC, Anthony points out this is the same federal government that's already looking through your bank account.
The government has almost unfettered access into who you are and what you're doing because it requires banks and other financial institutions to routinely report your financial activity.
Some argue the government will be forced to issue a CBDC to ensure the dollar remains the world's leading reserve currency. Technology, however, has nothing to do with the dollar's dominance. It's based on our rule of law, financial transparency, and capital markets. A badly managed CBDC, though, could cause other nations to ditch the dollar. This doesn't mean a digital dollar won't happen one day. Controlling people's money is, after all, the ultimate instrument of government control. But the Fed hasn't yet figured out how to make one work.
We're nowhere near recommending or let alone adopting a central bank digital currency in any form.
Dale Hurd joins us from the CBN News Desk with more. Dale, we saw just last week the vulnerability of computer networks due to the CrowdStrike security patch. Systems were shut down worldwide. I can't imagine going to your bank account to transfer funds or paying for food at a grocery store or a restaurant, suddenly discovering all your digital money's been zeroed out. Is that only fiction, or is it a legitimate concern?
It's a big concern. I don't know if you remember a few years ago when the government was hacked, I think the Pentagon, they found out they were using COBOL computer language, which is like over 30 years old. I think one of the senators said it was older than him. So yeah, this is the government managing things. And yes, zeroing out your money. In Pakistan, they did it a couple of years ago to protesters, not through digital money, but through the country's biometric citizen card or whatever. And of course, they did it in Canada against the truckers. So yeah, do you want the government in charge of all of your finances? I don't.
Well, you mentioned the Fed has been hacked several times in the past. It made it vulnerable to exposing sensitive information. So what would CBDC mean for privacy rights, not only as a result of computer hacking, but also from government snooping, like what was done to some of the January 6th participants? Would that be easier to do? Would AI make a difference?
Yeah, I don't know about AI, but it would be very easy to do. Now, Congress is paranoid about this, and just this year wrote a bill forbidding the Fed from issuing a currency. They don't want a national digital currency, but it didn't go anywhere. And as I've explained in the story, I don't think this is going anywhere in the near term because of all the obstacles to it.
Well, what do you say then to Christian eschatologists who insist we're getting closer to the end times because we'll soon have a global digital currency? So your report suggests it isn't as close to happening as many people may think, Dale.
Yeah, it would require a change in government, not a change in technology. In other words, it would require a government that didn't care about taking away your rights, didn't care about the security of the system, didn't care about whether it was smart or not. They were just power mad and they wanted to persecute the populace. So you go down the list of things this doesn't do well, and it's pretty long. And when we get to the fact that it hurts the banking sector, as I mentioned. It hurts the dollar as the world's reserve currency, and it hurts the Fed itself, which is way too small at this point to manage a national digital currency. So there are just too many technological obstacles to this right now. But I suppose a dictator or a malevolent force can do whatever they want.
Well, who's pushing this right now here in the U.S.?
Oh, good question. Not a lot of people. It's sort of a boogeyman in the back of people's imagination because of this fear that we look at China, we look at some of the experiments, and it is being experimented with all around the world, but that's not going to get over the obstacles that are that I explained that the obstacles to this is a digital currency.
Okay, Dale Hurd, excellent report. It's one we haven't seen elsewhere. Thank you, Dale, for sharing your insights. We appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Gary.
U.S. Secret Service Director Kim Cheadle has resigned. Her resignation was announced on Tuesday in an email sent to her staff. This came less than one day after she provided evasive responses to questions from members of the House Oversight Committee investigating the attempted assassination of President Donald Trump. During the hearing, it was evident that Cheadle had no desire to be truthful or transparent. She provided few substantive answers, often responding with, "I can't comment while that's under investigation." Members from both sides of the aisle demanded accountability.
We almost lost a presidential candidate the other day.
While we give overwhelming thanks to the individual Secret Service agents who did their jobs under immense pressure, this tragedy was preventable.
They wanted to know how the 20-year-old shooter, armed with an AR-15, was able to get on that roof and take shots at the former president.
I mean, you could have put Barney Fife on the roof and kept somebody from getting up there.
Trump's campaign reportedly made several requests for increased Secret Service protection before the event. The Secret Service spokesperson admitted the agency denied Trump's requests.
He said he acknowledged the Secret Service had turned down some requests. I'm asking how many?
A denial of a request does not equal a vulnerability.
Folks, there needs to be a thorough, independent investigation of the Secret Service operational plan and the events at Butler, Pennsylvania. This investigation must be conducted immediately. Cheadle did the right thing in resigning, but not in the way she led the Secret Service. She was more concerned with DEI training than protecting presidential candidates. Now, a new director must be tasked with restoring public confidence in the Secret Service. That should begin by transferring money from the agency's DEI program and using it to hire and properly train agents. The country deserves assurances that future assassination attempts like the one that came within a quarter of an inch of killing Donald Trump will not happen again. Well, that's it today from the Global Lane. Be sure to follow us on the CBN News and NRB channels, YouTube, iTunes, and Rumble. And until next time, be blessed.